Hi, I'm Lorraine, an alcoholic. They've moved the chair. For those of you who were here Friday night and Saturday night, they had a chair over here. And our first speaker, which I enjoyed both of you so much, thank you. Our first speaker used the chair to show us the miracle of physical healing that can happen within this program. And our second speaker last night used the chair and showed us the spiritual healing through faith. And the chair's gone. But I have something to show you, with or without a chair. This is a wino. Through physical healing and faith for spiritual healing, this is a wino from Skid Row. So I don't need a chair for it. I might get hot and start stripping down, but I don't need the music anymore to do it. So that's a lie. I never had music for it anyway, unless it was a stereo in the car. I really want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. Reading is very important to me. Reading was my first conference, and I immediately got hooked on them. I loved them. Everything about the Reading conference brings up warm, fuzzy memories for me. And it's a little too close to home for me to be too comfortable with it, though, because people are sitting here that watched me slither into my first meeting. And there are also people here who saw me Friday and said, well, I'll see you Sunday. So I have to be honest, completely honest. They've all told me they'll signal me if I don't. When I came into this program, I did not come in because I had hit my bottom. I didn't come in because I wanted to change my life. I came in because I wanted to find someone to take care of me. The absolute only reason I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous was to find another husband. I'd been through several and they weren't working out, so I figured I'd find a sober one for a change. I stayed around this program long enough that I found out I didn't need anyone to take care of me. All I needed was a relationship with God, and I got that. So you're lucky they have a suggested format, which is tell what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, because I can ramble all over. I get caught up in all the wonderful things that I've seen and been a witness to and that have happened, and I'll just talk about everything. So I try to stick with that. It helps me be somewhere within time. I was born in, don't be afraid, I'm not going to start with everything from my childhood. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, to what appeared to be a normal family, a father and a mother, and they stayed together. They never divorced, and an older brother and a younger brother, and it looked normal. It was about as dysfunctional as could possibly be, because my parents, I later found out, my father had quit drinking when my mother got pregnant with my older brother, and he never picked up another drink until he retired at 72. And then he drank just like I drank. So can you imagine what he went through? A very strong-willed man. But he turned all of his, whatever it was, that he didn't drink during those years, he turned it to work, and Mom was the housewife, and they did the best that they could to raise these 3 kids they had. Now, my older brother, He started drinking and running around with a wild crowd, and when I was about 11 years old, I was headed that direction. I had the inclination. Before that, I had been hiding in my room reading books. I had imaginary friends. I didn't know how to be around other children at school, and so after school, I would run right home to my room and read books and make a fantasy world, and I was very comfortable in my fantasy world. And I did church a lot. I liked church. I'm not a damaged Catholic. I hid in church. I found friendship and warmth in church. But the friendship, unfortunately, was with all the saints. There were no real people that I spoke with. And I didn't have a lot of social skills, but they weren't taught in our family. It was just, you just read a book, you stay in your room, you go to school, you come home and grow up and get out of the house. Not a lot of love, not a lot of warmth. But I don't blame my parents for my alcoholism. I don't blame anyone for my alcoholism. I think it was a blessing from God that got me here. And when I was 11 years old, I was physically attacked, and I didn't know what had happened to me. My older brother was dating a girl that was an older girl. She was about 16 at the time, and she drank and she smoked, and she knew all about the facts of life. And when I was attacked and I was brought home, the boys that did it told me, don't tell anyone because you'll get in trouble. So don't tell your parents. And I hadn't been able to talk to them up to that time anyway, so there wasn't a problem with that. I just went to my room and cried. My older brother came in, found out what had happened, and told my parents, and they told me to keep it secret, to not tell anyone. And that was the era back then. You kept it secret. You didn't go to any type of counseling or anything. You just kept it secret. But I didn't know what had happened to my body, and my brother took me over to his girlfriend's house, and she explained to me what had happened to my body. She explained it to me with a cigarette. I had my first cigarette, and a bottle of whiskey, and she told me all about the facts of life. So I kept those together from then on. For the next 32 years, it was the alcohol and the sex. I thought they went together because that's how I learned about them. By the time I was 13 years old, my parents had to take a geographic and move us to California because we were out there. I was running wild. I had discovered that when I combined the alcohol and the boys, I was popular. I had someone to talk to. I wasn't one of the girls that went to the dances. I didn't go to the football games. I wasn't a cheerleader. I was the one that was in the car outside behind the football games, with the bottle and the guys, the bad boys. I was cutting school. When I was just started junior high school, I was cutting school all the time, and I was running around with the high school boys. I was hanging out at the drugstore. We had, this will date me, we had the drugstores with the pinball machines and the guys with the motorcycles, and that's where I was hanging out. I was in junior high, and those were the boys I was with. My parents didn't know what to do with us, and so they did the only thing they knew, and that was to take a geographic and move us from Detroit, Michigan to San Jose, California, which I've always said San Jose is just the West Coast Detroit. There was absolutely no difference. I came out here and picked up exactly where I had left off, doing the same thing with the same guys, living the same lifestyle, only now I was a little older, so it was no longer the high school boys that I was getting drunk with all day. It was now the college-age guys. And by the time I was 15, I found another guy that was a lot like me. He was 17, and we decided the problem was our parents, was our home. If we got married, we could change. Everything would be wonderful. So we had a wonderful wedding, a full wedding. I was 15 years old, bridal gown, bridesmaid, big Catholic church, and we got married. That was husband number one. We had 2 little boys, a lot of violence. We were divorced before I was 18 years old. And I didn't want to make that mistake again. I knew better than to marry a 17-year-old. So I married a man who was 49 years old. And we had a little girl. He put me in a big home. See, my first marriage was a lot of, it was in the 60s, and we lived in the Bay Area, so there was a lot of introduction to better living through acid. And, I hear people saying better living through chemistry. It sounds nice, but, it was acid. And not for me, for my husband. I didn't take anything like that at that time. I only drank beer, and because I was trying to raise kids, and so I knew better than to drink, so it was like about 3 6-packs of beer a day, and I thought I wasn't drinking. And going to the doctor and telling him I'm a nervous wreck. I just, all these kids and this husband, and so he was giving me medication for nerves, and I was washing it down with the beer. But I was being good because I had quit drinking and running the streets. So this second husband put me in a nice home, gave me a nice new car, treated me like I was a little princess. Well, I was young enough to be his little princess. And I went to PTA and did everything that I was supposed to do that I thought was going to make me happy inside. We had a little girl. I'd go off to the PTA meetings drunk. I remember one time all the parents have to take turns at Little League selling hot dogs and stuff. And it was my turn. And I went into this booth, and they had this big old package of hot dogs. And there were about 5 people that had showed up for the game so far, and I cooked the entire package. By the time the people showed up, everything was cold and old, and I couldn't understand what was wrong with them. I thought I had done a wonderful job. I totally tore up their booth. I was giving sodas away, and they didn't ask me to work Little League again. But I tried really hard to be the good little housewife. My husband came home. He had his own business, and he came home from work one day, and he found me and his foreman together. His foreman liked to drink like I did. Oh, by that time I had started drinking, because this husband, he gambled, and he would take me to Reno. He would take me to places and put me on the bar stool. I was like his trophy. And I would stay drunk. I could drink with this one. So he came home from work one day, and he found me and his foreman drunk. And he threw me out. He told me that good foremen are hard to find, but a drunken broad he can find anywhere. So now I'm out in the streets. I'm not legally old enough to drink. I've got 3 children by now. And I knew that I didn't want to do this. I had seen TV. And I knew that, June Cleaver, you got the house, you got Ward, and you got the kids, and you vacuumed in your high heels. And that's what I thought I had to do. But I didn't have a husband, so I figured, okay, I'll be like these other TV women. I'll get a job, I'll support my kids, and I'll have my own home, and I'm not going to run to a husband to take care of me. I'm going to be a supporting single mother. So I got a job, put my kids over at the babysitter's, and I went to work. I went to work in a beer bar, and I was a good working mother. I would work, I would go home, pick up the kids, feed them dinner, and then spend a quality evening with them and go back to work the next day. I did that for about a week, and then I stopped coming home so much. Then I started staying out and getting drunk after work, going home with the owner of the bar, then the manager, and then whatever customer would pick me up. And it reached the point where I was just sleeping in my car. And I ended up in the hospital. And that was the first time anyone talked about my drinking, other than being called a drunken broad. It was the first time anyone mentioned there might be something wrong with my drinking. I was in the hospital, and the doctor told me if I continued to drink that way that I would die. I was devastated and got well, went back to work, got another job. The first guy was so glad that I wasn't working for him anymore. He wouldn't take me back. So I got another job, and it was in another beer bar. And in my first week back, I was crying in my beer one night, and as I said, I was drinking beer. I didn't think that was drinking. So I was drinking beer one night with a customer who just walked in, and I told him my sad story about how I couldn't drink anymore. The doctor had said I would die if I drank. And he told me that he had something else I could do, and I wouldn't have to drink. So I took off with him. I'd never laid eyes on this man, and I went to San Francisco with him and went into a Shell gas station men's room, which today seems a little bizarre that I would go off and be with 3 strange men in a men's room in San Francisco that I had never seen, and they told me that if I put this into my body, I would feel great and I would never have to drink again. And I did it. But up until that time, and for a long time afterwards, I would do anything that a man told me. Whatever they told me would make me acceptable to them, I would do. And whatever they told me to put in my body, I would do. So I did. and I was introduced to the world of street drugs. I never stopped drinking. I drank the entire time. But that led me very rapidly to my bottom. I quit going home to my kids. All of my children were taken from me. The man that I met in that men's room, well, the one that took me up there ended up being husband number 3. The man that I met in the gas station bathroom ended up being husband number 4. Well, he had a lot of things that I wanted. So I lost all my children. They were taken from me by the state, or I had one husband put a gun in my face. I was in a bar, and I turned around and put a gun in my face, and he said, "Give me my daughter. I don't want her around you. I don't want her to turn out like you." And he took her from me, and I didn't see her again for 8 years. My boys were taken from me by the state. I was sent to do some time. I did a little county time here and a little county time there, and never gave it a thought why I was doing it, what was happening to me. I was living in the streets. I was incapable of working. I was breaking into people's cars to spend the night. I was breaking into their apartments to steal their food and take a shower. And I say that once again for about a week, because then I quit taking the showers. Then I was just breaking in their places and crashing and taking out whatever I could. And the whole time I was drinking the whole time. They finally locked me up. They locked me up for a year. And I waited. I was like you put me in a closet. You just put me in a closet somewhere and pass the time and then let me out. Because the minute I got out, I didn't give it another thought. I started drinking at the airport. This was in Southern California, and I had to fly up to San Jose. I was drinking in the airport, and by the time I got to San Jose, I was drunk again. 30 days later, I was violated, and I had a new case. And they sent me back, and I did another year. Well, this time I was a little older and a little wiser, so when they let me out that time, they paroled me. I knew not to get drunk at the airport. I knew it had something to do with the alcohol, the altitude, and to not do that. One of the things that happened when I was on my state vacation was I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous through H&I. They would come out there and they would drive all the way from Riverside, and at that time they would bring donuts and cigarettes and coffee and men. So I would go to the meetings, and I would go to eat, smoke, drink, and look. And that's the only reason I went. And that's the reason most of us went. But what I did get from those meetings was how nice the people were in Alcoholics Anonymous, how very kind and nice they were to make that drive, to spend the evening with us. I mean, I saw them make it in horrible weather and in beautiful weather where they should have been out having picnics. They were driving to carry a message to these other women who were doing time. I knew that they weren't carrying it to me, because I knew that if they had known where I had been, what I had done, and who I had done it with, they wouldn't bring a cigarette out to me, let alone a message of hope. And I knew that they were very nice people carrying a message for everyone else but me. Another thing that happened is when I tried to parole the second time, I called my mother and I told her that I needed to use her address because I had to have an address to parole to. My mother called the parole board, or the parole department, and said, "We don't want her in Santa Clara County. We don't want her anywhere around us." Nobody wanted anything to do with me. Didn't know where my children were. Husband number 4 liked me. He still loved me. And he had been paroled from San Quentin shortly before that, like a month before that. So he was the only one in the world I had. He was the only person that I had left who would talk to me. I didn't have a very big social life when I was out there. I was mostly running around, sneaking around in the dark. But this husband loved me. So when I got out, like I said, I didn't drink at the airport. This time I waited until I got home. Well, I had to parole somewhere else, so I paroled to Oakland. And I went to this halfway house. One of the things that they always seem to put the halfway houses in the best neighborhoods. I mean, you could never find anything to get drunk on in those places. The liquor store was right at the corner of the house that I went to. So when I got there, I put my bag in the room, I learned the rules of the house, and I went out, and I went to the liquor store. And I got drunk. And I stayed drunk for 3 days before I remembered to call my husband to tell him I was home. So I called my husband, and he was up in the Santa Rosa area at the time, and I told him that I was home to come and get me. He said he would be there at 8 o'clock the next morning. Then he said something very strange. He said, "Lorraine, I can't live that way anymore. I just can't do it anymore." This man had been in and out of prison since he was 17 years old, and he didn't want to go back there anymore. He'd been introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, and it just wasn't for him at that time. And he said, I want the children back. I want our home. I can't live like that anymore. And I said, I had no idea really what he was talking about because I had lived no other way. You know, from the time I was 12 years old, I had stayed drunk. From the time I was 12 years old, I didn't have a loving, caring home. I didn't have, the children and dinner and all that. I had tried, periodically, I tried to put it together, but I just couldn't. And I told him, yeah, just come and pick me up. Well, I know where we can get some really good stuff, is what I said to him. God has always been in my life. God has always cared about me. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all because when I was a little girl, I would hang out in church, and I knew that I had a loving, kind God, a friend. And when I started drinking, I had to hide from God. Not because I thought he was going to damn me to hell, excuse my language, but because I knew I was a disappointment. I knew how much he loved me, and here I was living this way. So I had to hide from God. And I lived my life as if he would never see me. And I can tell you now that my story is one of miracles, one miracle after another, that I have been allowed to witness and look back on and remember and still see every day. The next morning when my husband was supposed to pick me up at 8 o'clock in the morning, the woman that ran the recovery house came and sat on the side of my bed, and she took my hand, and I tried to get up, get going. I'm busy here. I've been locked away for a year. I got lots to do. And she grabbed my hand and she said, "Do you believe in God?" I said, yeah, yes, I do. And she wouldn't let me go, and she said, "Sometimes we just don't know why things are the way they are, but we have to believe that there's a reason, that God has a reason." And then she told me my husband was dead. She'd just gotten the phone call. My husband knew. He knew what was going to happen when he came and picked me up. He knew that he was going to go right back to that same lifestyle with no hope, total hopelessness. And he took the only way out that he had, and he was the only person that I had left in the world. So I didn't know where the kids were. The family didn't want me around. His family didn't want me around. He and I had a baby girl. He had delivered that baby girl in our bed because I couldn't get it together enough to figure out that I was in labor. I didn't know I was pregnant until I was 5 months pregnant, and I gave birth to her at 7 months. He had delivered that child and taken me to the hospital, and, well, actually, he didn't take me to the hospital. The neighbor heard me giving birth through the apartment wall, called the police and the ambulance, and they walked in, and the police had been wondering where my husband and I were. And they took me to the hospital and put my little baby in the nursery, and I left the hospital. My husband and I left the hospital. It was 6 weeks before my husband went back and picked up my daughter and took her over to his sister to raise, to save her life, to get her away from me. So here this last man that I had left, this last person, was now dead. And I got drunk, I stayed drunk. It wasn't got drunk, I just drank more. I went to his funeral and I created a scene. as only a drunken broad can. I created the scene, and then they were all getting in the family cars, and they were going to the cemetery to bury him. And I told them I'd be right with them. I'd meet them out there. I had something I had to do. And they were so relieved that I was going to be gone that they didn't ask what I could possibly have to do on the day of my husband's burial. And I went to a bar. I went to a bar and I told them my sad story, how I was all alone in the world. I had nobody left now. I had no one to talk to. It was pathetic. And everyone bought me a drink. Everyone bought me a drink, the poor widow. And I ended up where I had started out when I picked up that first drink of whiskey many years before. I ended up on Skid Row, 5th and Howard, at the Howard Hotel. The rooms, I think, were like 75 cents if you wanted sheets, and then when you couldn't afford that, they were 50 cents a night. And I was living on, I could drink anything I wanted now. Price was no object. I was stealing my booze. So I stole Ripple. Got me there fast. I was sitting on the curbs and I was drinking. I was sleeping in the bus depot. And I had finally arrived where I fit, where I no longer had to worry about people not wanting me around. I didn't have to think about, cleaning the house, raising the kids, being home when the old man got home. I didn't have to think about any of that anymore. All I had to do was drink my Ripple, come to, and drink my Ripple. In San Francisco, down in that area, there are people that will take home just about anybody. They don't really care. Well, nobody asked me to go home with them. I was out there in the streets a long time, and I looked good. I looked good out there. I had on my funeral attire. I had on my little cropped green top with my little green mini skirt. The hem came up to about the navel, and the 4-inch platform heels. And I had started out with pantyhose, lost those somewhere along the line. So maybe someone was talking to me. I don't remember. Finally, I was found by my parole officer. And when I first got sober, I really couldn't remember all of the details in between there. But gradually things are revealed to us. And what had happened was somebody did decide he wanted to take me home. And he was good husband material because he had his own bottle, didn't want any of mine. And we decided we were going to get married, and he was going to be husband number 5, and we were going to set up housekeeping. So we found this real cute little apartment, and we crawled through the front window. The police immediately followed us, and I ended up in San Francisco jail. And that's how my parole officer found me. Fortunately, he didn't become husband number 5. She decided that locking me away was not doing any good, that maybe I needed to be introduced to some type of recovery. And so she put me in a recovery program in Redwood City. And it was a 6-month program where you learned all about how to stay sober. You learned all the intellectual parts of it. But it was also a 12-step program. They would take us out to AA meetings. I was there the required time, and then it was time for me to leave. Nothing had changed. I was exactly the same person that I had been when I was locked up. I didn't think that I had a problem with alcoholism. I didn't think it was any problem. It was the way I lived. It was the only way that I knew how to live. I had been living that way my entire life. So I didn't think there was a problem here. I thought the problem was that, people were just so rigid about it. The police kept arresting me for just little things. I wasn't really hurting anybody, and the family wouldn't talk to me. They didn't understand. I didn't really see that I had a problem. And the few times that it did come to me that maybe there was a problem with alcohol, I knew that there wasn't a solution for me. I knew there was a solution for you. And when I became it was time for me to leave the program. I had nowhere to go. Nothing had changed. I knew I was going back into the streets. I knew I was going to go find a bottle of Ripple somewhere. So I did what I needed to do. I became an alcohol and drug counselor. Yeah. I was the one that, they would get passes and they would go out. When they'd come back, we had to pat them down and make sure that they hadn't done anything they shouldn't have done on pass. And when they would have something in their pocket or their hem, I would have to take it from them, and then I would go into the bathroom and take it and put them on restriction and wait till the next time I could send them back. And I wasn't a very good alcohol and drug counselor. The program folded eventually, which, big surprise. I was just like all the rest of the counselors, and I had to go out into the streets, and nothing had changed. I was still that same girl that I had been years before. I was going to go out in the streets and live there. I didn't want to do that. I was getting a little bit older. Now I'm in my late 20s, and I know it gets cold at night. So I had to do something. So I married another counselor, and he and I went out together. Now, he was clean, and he was sober, and he had about a year. And on his sobriety alone, we got a little house. It had a picket fence, and we got jobs. We got a dog, and we got 2 of the kids back, and one started visiting us. And life started looking pretty good, and I had the big book, and I had the 12 by 12, and I had them on a bookcase in my living room, and I would dust around them, and never touch them, and just dust around them, and I had my Valium hidden under my dresser, and I had my vodka in the trunk and the wine in the closet, and I was pretending that I was okay. I wanted everyone to know I was okay. I was getting up in the morning, getting the kids ready for school, and then I'd be going to work. And I was able to hold that together for a while, maybe a week. And it started getting hard, getting up in the morning and waving good morning to the neighbors. Things started falling apart for me. And when I've been in these rooms and I've heard women say, "Oh, I don't have a very interesting story. I was just a housewife. I drank at home." I think, oh my God, I could never do that. I couldn't do that. That's what brought me to my knees. That's when I hit my bottom. Give me a bottle, let me sit on the curb, I'm fine. Don't give me any responsibilities, don't make me keep anything together. Just let me devote 100% of myself to that drink, and I'm okay. Because when you put me in that house and I had to hold it together, I went to my knees. I walked off my job, and from here on out, I get to tell you one miracle after. Of course, there's a lot of miracles back there. I was still alive. I walked off my job. I was working in a machine shop, and it happened to be my father's. My father started talking to me again, and my father always loved me. My father always loved me through all this, but he wasn't allowed to talk to me. He wasn't allowed to have anything to do with me if he wanted to go home to Mother. So when I was that little counselor, he decided I changed my life, and he gave me a job in his machine shop. So living like this little housewife was so hard, I walked off my job one day. I said, that's it, I just can't do it anymore. I got these kids back that I had thought that I wanted back, but I didn't know how to love them. I didn't know how to love yet. And I had this husband. He wasn't doing too well right then, though, because hanging around with me, for some reason, he started drinking again. And we had a lot of violence going on. There was a lot of drinking. My kids were drinking. My kids were using. And they were 11 and 13 when they came back to me. But they were doing exactly what they had learned to do from me and from their father. So there was a lot of chaos and insanity going on in the house, and yet I was trying not to drink where they would know I was drinking. I was trying to hide my drinking. But I couldn't take it, and I walked off the job. I got in my car, and I drove away. I got exactly 1 block and stopped at a stop sign. This car pulled up next to me, and the guy tooted the horn. And he was a man who had volunteered at the recovery house where I had been before. He used to come out at night, and hold little meetings or take people to meetings. And he had 14 years in Alcoholics Anonymous at that time. So he asked me how I was doing. He hadn't seen me in so long. And I told him I was doing great. I said, I found out I can stay sober without Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, the reason I told him that was because I needed a new husband. And this man had 14 years sober, and I knew that he would be a good husband. I needed a sober one. And one of the miracles is of all the people that would be there, You know, it was him. And he had 14 years sober, and he was a very accomplished 13th stepper. So he was the perfect one. He was the perfect one. Because I could not hear vertically. You could not get through to me vertically. So he was the one, and he said, well, that's great. How about we go out to dinner tonight so you can tell me all about it? Well, I know this is going to work. So I went out to dinner with him, and I stayed with him for 3 days. And I thought he didn't know that I had been drinking. This man had 14 years, and on the third day, he told me, I was getting pretty sick too, he told me, I can't have anything to do with a woman who's not in Alcoholics Anonymous. So, being willing to go to any length to get a husband, I said, okay. So off I went to a meeting. He told me where to go that night, to a meeting. I went to the meeting. The door opened. It was this elevator. The door opened right there in the cafeteria were these people. I took one look, and it terrified me, absolutely terrified me. And I ran out of that hospital and drove home as fast as I could. He called me that night, and he said, why didn't you come into the meeting? And I said, because it would be too much like surrendering. I just can't do it. Another miracle that happened. And I call these miracles, and you may not think they are. You can call them coincidences or whatever you want, but I know, for me, they were gifts from God. They were miracles. Because he said, well, what if I send a woman to pick you up to take you to a meeting? Well, the miracle is I said, okay. You see, I wanted nothing to do with women. Nothing. I couldn't. You know, they're not going to take care of me. I'd been locked up with women, and I knew I couldn't marry one. Well, today I know I could have, but at that time I didn't know it. So I didn't want anything to do with women. And I said yes. He picked a woman to come and pick me up who was so perfect. She was absolutely perfect to pick me up, to take me in my first meeting. Because my first meeting was in San Carlos, California, home of the perfect, beautiful women. And when I went in there, they were. You know, they all had their hair combed, their makeup was on perfect, and the worst part was they had love and light in their eyes. And I wanted nothing to do with that. The last thing I wanted was some woman running towards me with light in her eyes telling me, welcome home, honey. I did not need that. And what I got instead was a woman who had as bad an attitude as I did. And she took me to meetings. We hung around for 5 years. We were best friends. And you know, it was one of those things where at the first meeting they say, are there any newcomers? Introduce yourself. Well, the woman on my right side elbowed me, and she said, that's you, honey. Say your name. And this gal that had brought me, she said, them, you don't need to say anything here. And I liked her. And I never, you know, it was like, well, her attitude never changed. For 5 years that we hung out together, her attitude did not change. She did not stay sober. And thank God my attitude changed, because I'm here today. Well, her and I hung out together for 5 years, you know. Socially, we'd go to the gym together, we'd go to dinner together, and we'd go to meetings all the time together. And people didn't really enjoy the two of us coming into meetings together because we were a little disruptive. There wasn't a lot of respect for your program. We knew we were different. I mean, the first few years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I referred to myself as Lorraine, an alcoholic addict. I had to be just a little bit different than you. I had to be a little worse or a little better. I just could not quite fit in there, because if I just was Lorraine, an alcoholic, then I would have to be like you. I'd have to do some work. I'd have to do the steps. I'd have to change. So I wanted to keep that little difference. And people weren't real thrilled with us coming to meetings, and someone suggested that I might want to find a sponsor, so it was time to look around to find a sponsor. Well, as I said, I came into these meetings to find a husband, and that was that man with 14 years. 6 weeks after I was going to my first meeting, he went off to the Monterey Young People's Conference, and he got married. The gal I was hanging around with, she was devastated and angry, and I was fine. You know, by then I had been around 6 weeks, and I knew there were plenty of men in here that had a good portfolio. So I was okay with it. But I had to find a sponsor. So I had to go out, and they kept saying, find a woman who has what you want. So I asked this guy's wife that he'd married in Monterey if she'd be my sponsor. She had what I wanted. And that didn't work out. That didn't work out real well. So I had to get another sponsor, and this time the group assigned me a sponsor, and she was 16 years sober, and she was a tough old gal. She was wonderful. And she told me, first thing, she said, you quit running around looking for a man because they're just, your walking bottle. That's it. You're going to, no relationships for 1 year. And I did that pretty well for about a month, actually. And she was really on my back about it. And anyway, she was my sponsor. I went to meetings, and I would listen. I did not take a drink. I did not smoke a joint. I didn't take any drugs. I didn't take any, even medications. I did not do it. Not because I wanted to change. Not because I thought that if I did this stuff, my life would get better. Not because I wanted a relationship with God. I didn't do it for one reason and one reason only. It's because you people were serious about it. It meant something to you. So I didn't take anything. And what happened was there was time for this alcohol to leave my brain and leave my body. And after a few months of coming to meetings, I found myself in the sponsor's kitchen on my knees crying about how I thought I might be an alcoholic. She was thrilled. I was devastated. She said, you're going to start getting better now. And she told me I had to start sharing. And you know what's funny is, at that time, you asked me to chair a meeting. You tell me it's an hour meeting, I'd be lucky to get out of my 14th year in the hour. I was just like, I had everything to tell you. And when I thought this morning about coming here and sharing with you in the amount of time that I'm supposed to share, it's like, I can tell you everything in 10 minutes. I was dying. I asked God to help me, and I have life. The longer I'm sober, the shorter my chair gets. Because it's real. It's not me. We've all been through that life of dying out there. So she told me, my sponsor told me I had to get into service. And I started chairing meetings, and I was talking everywhere. And someone asked me to go to a hospital meeting up in the hills of Belmont, and I did. And that was my sobriety date. I can tell you the day I got sober. Not the day I quit drinking and going to meetings, but I can tell you the day I got sober. I went off to this meeting with someone, and first he asked me if I'd go chair this hospital meeting, and I said, well, I'd really like to, but I don't do hospital meetings because I didn't get sober that way. I got sober the real way. I toughed it out. And he felt that perhaps I really should do this hospital meeting. So I went, and I shared the meeting. And I found out what alcohol can do. I found out about when they say alcoholic insanity, because I didn't know what that was. You see, I look around this room and you all look good. You look good. And that's the kind of meetings I was going to. Everyone was looking good. So I didn't know that if you drink one drink too many, you can cross that line and go into alcoholic insanity and never come back. And this hospital that I was taken to, they had people in there that had crossed that line. I also didn't know that you could die as a direct result of drinking too much. I knew you could die in a car accident, from drunk driving. I knew that you could go to prison, and I knew what alcohol could do. I did not know that alcohol could actually kill you. And I found out that night. I met a girl who was dying of cirrhosis of the liver, and she was only in her 20s. And she did eventually die from it. And I found out what alcohol could do because, see, where I had come from, St. James Park, sitting there drinking with the guys, passing the bottle in the brown paper bag, somebody would vanish one day, and we never wondered where Joe went. There was always another Joe to take his place. And I found out that night that some people, what can happen with the one drink too many. I walked out of that hospital, and it set up in the hills, and I looked up at the sky, and I thanked God. I thanked God for my life. I thanked Him that I didn't have one drink too many. As many as I had, God had saved me from one drink too many. And I told God where I was. Up until that time, I had been hiding from God. Like I told you, I didn't want to say too many prayers and have Him notice me. I didn't want Him to see the places I was and the things I was doing. I stood out there and I opened my arms and I said, "Thank you, God. Help me." And my sobriety began that night. It was my first hospital and institution meeting, and those of you who know me know that we're going on a hospital and institution ride in this chair, because I love hospitals and institutions. I have not been out of it since that first meeting. I've gone to hospitals. That first meeting I went to for 5 years. I didn't have enough time. I didn't qualify in the pink pamphlet to go out to an H&I meeting, but I'm so grateful to God that they let me. And I became coordinator of that meeting, and I loved it. I so looked forward to it. And I knew a lot of times I would take people to share, and they would say, "Well, these people don't even know we're here." And I said, "They know that there are nice people that care. And you know that one drink more, and you'll be there. We don't know which drink it is." So anyway, I stayed active, and I quit hunting around for men. I made a friend. He didn't want a woman, and I didn't want a husband. Well, I really did, but I was pretending I didn't because my sponsor told me I didn't. And I started getting well. I started doing the steps, or say weller. I never did get well. I started doing the steps. And I found this companion. We'd go to meetings and we'd go to shows, and we were safe together. He just came out of an ugly divorce, and we decided to get married. And it's worked. We've been married 19 years. One of the reasons that it's worked, I know, is because I didn't look to him to make me better. I was living my own life, doing my own program. He was living life. I was doing his program. And, the marriage has worked because I didn't need anything from him to make me well. So we got married and set up housekeeping. Kids came back. Kids went away. I had to put one of my sons in juvenile hall. I had to walk him into juvenile hall and have him locked up for doing what I had taught him how to do. Hardest thing I've ever done. If it hadn't been for these women in the program that had more time than me, I never could have done it. But they loved me through it, and they said, if we don't do what God wants us to do now, we're going to keep having to go through it over and over until we do what God wants us to do. And I know that was the best thing for him because it saved his life as hard as it was. Like I said, I was real active in the program. I was running around doing all kinds of service, and I was almost 7 years sober, and I knew that no matter how the outside looked, I knew that inside I was missing something, because half measures avail us nothing. And when I was out there and I was drinking, I was giving it 100% of myself. 100%. I mean, I gave it my children. I gave it my parents. I gave it my self-respect. I gave it my dignity. I gave it my faith. I gave everything that I had to my alcoholism. And here I was in the program, and I was, okay, I'll do a little of this and I'll do a little of that, but I hadn't given it 100% of my life. And I was looking around when I was almost 7 years sober, and I knew the ones that had the gift, the ones that had the light, the true light inside of them. And I started going on a quest for a sponsor to do the steps with, because I really wanted to do the steps. Not just the first 3.5. So I went out and I started interviewing for a sponsor. I found this one gal, and I asked her, I said, have you ever done the steps? And she said, yes. And I said, how'd you do them? And she looked at me like I was nuts, and she said, through the big book. How else are you going to do them? And I asked her to be my sponsor. She was the total opposite of me. Total opposite. I had been living in the streets. She'd gone to college. She had one husband. I had 6. And She didn't understand me. It was wonderful for me, though, because when I would talk to her about things that I had done or was feeling or something, my language, when I would talk to her, she didn't understand me, and she'd say, I don't understand what that means. What are you saying? And I'd have to go through it again, and it lost so much of its power. I couldn't shock her. I just had to finally give up and speak English, let go a lot of those words that I was using. And she taught me how to carry myself like a lady. I dropped the language. I started treating you with more respect. I dropped the addict. I didn't have to come in here and say, I'm Lorraine, an alcoholic. Everything else, go on forever. It allowed a lot more time for sharing. So she taught me a lot of that, and we went through the steps. The whole time I stayed in service, and my relationship started healing. My mother and dad wanted me to start coming down and visiting once in a while. Of course, they never credited the change in my life to me, to God, to Alcoholics Anonymous. They felt I'd finally married the right man. Look how she's got it together now. So I was allowed back in their life, and Mom still believes that, but that's okay. So my husband was going to retire, and it was time for us to move away because I didn't want to live in the Bay Area. It gets pretty expensive. So we had to move away, and I prayed for years. I sat at the end of my bed, and I'd pray, God, where do you want us to go that we can be of the most use for you? Where do we go? I had been nurtured in Alcoholics Anonymous. All of my life was in Alcoholics Anonymous in the Bay Area. I hadn't had a life before I came in there. I didn't know what it was like to live and have friends before that. Now I had to leave it, and I was frightened. I was frightened because I could be alone again. I didn't know where to go, but I knew that if I kept praying, God would take us where He wanted us. And He did. He put us up in paradise, and I don't like the mountains, and I don't like trees. I like the desert. I like flatland. So this definitely wasn't me. He had us, one miraculous thing after another happened, that we moved into paradise, but it happened so fast when it was God's timing. And I'm so happy up there because, you see, I would have picked the desert, somewhere where I could have been alone with a cactus. And I ended up in paradise where I have made friendships that are so deep and so loving. And the people are so wonderful up there. And the fellowship is so big. I never would have picked that town. I had been there 25 years before and went through it and said, I'll never live up here. And there I am. We've been up there almost 10 years. And the last 5 years have been just incredible for me. I have had so many opportunities for change and for practicing my faith. And the last 5 years have been absolutely a wonderful, fabulous gift from God. My oldest son moved from the Bay Area. He had been living in a house. There's a meeting in Burlingame. And a block from that, my son had been living in the house, my oldest boy, with the windows painted black, sitting in there with a shotgun, doing the things his father and I had taught him how to do. And I'd have to drive right past his house. I could have parked at his house and walked to the meeting. And I'd go to the meeting and I'd cry and I'd think, how come? How come I'm here? My kids are all out there. The only thing they're doing is what they learned from me and their fathers. My kids are out there dying, and I'd come into meetings and I'd hear these women talk about how their homes are healing and their families are all coming back together. And I knew I wasn't supposed to have envy. I knew I wasn't supposed to have jealousy. I knew I wasn't supposed to be feeling those things, and my head knew it. But my heart was breaking. My heart was breaking. So we moved off to Paradise, and that oldest boy left that house, and he moved to Oakdale, which is right by Modesto. And he stopped drinking, and he started getting his life together. He didn't do it through this program. He did it through, I won't tell his story anyway. He did it through God. And then he got sick. My son started getting sick, and We didn't know what was wrong with him, but we did know that the doctors weren't taking a real big interest because, he's covered with tattoos, long hair, the whole thing, and they weren't taking a big interest. It's like, well, just take these drugs and go leave us alone. But I knew my son was getting sicker and sicker, and we needed to find some help for him. I was so blessed because when I moved to Paradise, I was given the opportunity to work for a man that's also sober in this program. And so he had a lot of understanding. And I feel that was a real gift from God because I told him, I have to go to Oakdale and see if we can find a doctor for my son. I had a sponsor in Paradise. Because everywhere I go, I get a sponsor that can look me in the eyes. I don't want a long-distance sponsor. I can keep them to talk to, but I need someone who can look me in the eyes. So I had a sponsor in Paradise. Now, my son is sick. My father was just informed that he doesn't have long to live. And he's in Santa Clara, and he wants me to come down and help him. And my sponsor decides to move. And she moved to Modesto, 11 miles away from my son's house. So I would work, and I would drive to Oakdale, be with my son, drive him to San Francisco, go to the doctors, take him home, go over to Santa Clara, be with my father. My father wanted me in his home. My father wanted to be with me, have me with him when he was dying. I walked in my parents' house to be a part of the most important thing that can happen to a human being, is when they're leaving to meet their God. And my father wanted me to be there during that time. My son needed me in Oakdale. My father wanted me in Santa Clara. I had a job in Paradise, a husband in Paradise, husband in the program, thank God, because he let me go. He let me go to Oakdale, Santa Clara, make that trip over and over and over. My employer allowed me to go, covered for me at work. It was just, what a gift from God. What a gift from God. Our car, we had a warranty on our car. The warranty ran out after my father died. And my son had moved up close to me. And that's God, too. I was gone all the time. I had the energy. I had the strength. I had the faith. I stood up and I looked in doctors' faces. And I didn't work the serenity prayer maybe the way that I should have. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I didn't just say my son is sick and I can't change it. He gave me the courage to change the things that I could. To stand up to doctors, although here I was a sturdy little wino. Had no business talking to professional people, and I would stand up and I would look these doctors in the face and I'd say, I haven't had this boy for years and I'm not going to let go. We're going to fight for him. And I was with my father, and I got to be with my father for 72 hours straight and hold his hand and pray with him while he died. And then I went back to Paradise, moved my son up to Paradise. He wanted to be with me. This is a kid that I had abandoned, that I had walked out on, him and his little brother. I would go out to get I'm going to get some milk, kids. They were 3 years old and 5 years old. I'm going to get some milk. Mommy will be right back. And Mommy would pick up a drink, and Mommy wouldn't come back. For 3 or 4 days, Mommy wouldn't come back. And if it wasn't for the neighbors, I don't know that my kids would be alive. These are the kids that ended up with their lives at 10, 11, and 12 years old, using drugs, living in the streets, living with shotguns, going in and out of juvenile hall. I got sober, I stayed sober, and I worked these 12 steps, and I got my faith in God, and I told God where I was. And I did everything that you people told me to do. And because of that, my oldest son said, Mom, I want to come to Paradise and live by you. And him and his family moved up to live by us. And then my second son, when he got out of prison the last time, he wanted to come up and live by me too. I didn't do this. You did this. You did this by introducing me to God. A God that I can say, here I am. You did this by not throwing me out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was coming in and I was disrupting the meetings. You did this by allowing me to stay and telling me that if I just don't leave, things will get better. So I have my kids up by me. And my son has found a wonderful doctor. People told me, don't move in Paradise. There's no doctors up there. And you know what? The one doctor that cared the most about his unusual disease was up there. And my son is getting treatments. And he's going to live. My mother didn't want me in Santa Clara County. My mother wanted me nowhere around her. She didn't want me around her from the time I was a little girl. But after my father died, I thought, good, I don't have to have anything more to do with her. And what happened instead was, because of you, because of this program, because of the changes that have occurred within me by being with the wonderful women who work these steps and allow God to work through their lives, is it didn't matter what kind of mother I had. It mattered what kind of daughter I was. And I became the daughter that God had intended me to be. I moved my mother from Santa Clara to paradise. That's a miracle. And I didn't do it so that she could love me. I did it so that I could love her. It just doesn't matter what she thinks of me. I'm taking the best care that I can for this woman. Now, I'm not well enough. I moved her in my house. I don't want to leave that impression. But I did put her in a home that's real close to my house. And I go and see her all the time. And that's the important thing, is that I am the woman that God wants me to be. I've been very blessed. I've been very blessed with friendship. I've been very blessed with love. And when I told you that I didn't know how to love my kids, I didn't. I had never felt love as a young girl. I thought love was what the guys told me to do, and I'd do it, and then they'd like me, and that was love. Through this program, I've found out what love is. I love my children. I love my husband. I love the women in this program. I even love the men in this program with the heart. And I love hospital and institution work. I love the traditions and the steps. Gee, I just love everything. But I really do. I do. It's my life. I never had a life before I found these things, before God led me to these things and you handed them to me. I have a granddaughter who is in the program. When I talked about, I would go to meetings and I would say, how come everyone else is getting, their families are getting well? They don't have to be out there dying. This little girl was given to my husband and I when she was just a little girl because her father and her mother were out there practicing what I had taught them to do. And they asked me to take care of her while they went and found recovery, which took them a little while. And I was privileged enough to be able to have my granddaughter in the home with me. And this was a miracle because, it was her father that I would leave and not come back, that I would forget to come back to. And they trusted that I could help them raise their little girl for a very brief period, but they knew that I wasn't going to go out and lose her or abuse her, that they'd come home and she'd be fine. So she was exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous from the time she was like a day old. And she still had to go out there, Everything she heard, just like the rest of us, well, maybe I can do it different. Maybe their hats will be off to me. And she walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. I think she was at 14. She walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. Maybe at 13. She was 13. Yeah, because she's got 5.5 years of sobriety. That's her story. That's not mine. I'm very, very proud of her. I'm very proud, and I will talk to you privately about her. I'll show you pictures and tell you all about how she graduated as class valedictorian. But I won't do that because it's her story. But that's how God works. I would have had my oldest son come in first, and then the second son, then daughter 1, then daughter 2, and, then grandkids. I would have healed the family that way because it would have looked really good, and we could all been sitting here. That whole little section could have been my alcoholic family in recovery, but that's not the way God wanted it. And so I ask you, because my granddaughter walked in when she was 13. You kept this program the same way that it was when I walked in when I was 33. And the way hundreds of others before me walked in, and this program was here the way it is. And I ask you to keep it going just this way. The same traditions, the same steps. The same letting people have time to get the alcohol out of their heads. And don't tell them they're too young to be here, or they're too noisy to be here, or whatever it is, you know. It was here, this program was here for me, and this program was here for my granddaughter. And I just have a little bit of a feeling that the alcoholism in our family didn't stop there. And I would like it here for any future generations that come. Not only in my family, but in yours. So, I didn't get too much into H&I. I usually do. I'm about out of time. And I want to thank you very much for giving me a life. When I walked in here, I had no hope. I had no life. Well, I had a little hope. I was hoping I'd find someone to take care of me. But I didn't have any life. I was not the woman you see before you. The woman you see before you can handle things with grace and dignity and enjoys loving. You know, when I came in, I couldn't get a hug. I did not want you to hug me. And if you did hug me, I might pick your wallet. Today, I like being touched, and I like women. I didn't like women when I walked in because I didn't like me. Today, I love me. And that's because I know I'm a child of God. And I know that He is with me right now. And He's with all of us because I believe in the miracles of this program. Thank you very much for having me.